Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Today, we are back with another culture topic. If you follow me on Instagram, Jay Doran underscore the culture man, you see these conversations, these 1, 2, 3, 4 minute conversations around various topics, business, life, culture, etc., etc. And today, we're expanding on one of the topics: how to ensure employees feel valued. So follow me on Jay Doran uh, underscore the culture man on Instagram, and follow along with us on the Culture Matters podcast as I unpack these topics and we go through this together, these thoughts together. So today, how do you ensure employees feel valued? I think the elephant in the room on making sure employees feel valued is something I don't often see or read in books, which is compensation. It might be common sense or so obvious it's not spoken about, or maybe even unappreciated versus the past because we, as a culture today, are emphasizing other responsibilities. Let's say there's a different accountability matrix going on between our culture and organizations as it relates to employees and employment in our culture today. But the elephant in the room, I want to bring up compensation, because if a company is not growing, if a company is not being managed properly, and so we'll define properly as in most effective, efficient, based on people's actual jobs, like their responsibility to the organization, their responsibility as shareholders, that affects employees, that affects everyone. If we're not as effective or as efficient as we could be, and there's things within our domain that we actually do something about it, like it's not out of our ability to do something about it, then that actually affects employees. So how to ensure employees feel valued? Compensation isn't talked about enough. If the organization is not being managed responsibly, then employees will not be compensated accordingly. And what affects someone's life? Compensation affects someone's life even below their awareness. If they can't pay for goods and services or products for their life because the world becomes more expensive and the company hasn't had its you follow me, together for a long enough period of time, it's one of those things where you don't feel it until nothing happens until all at once. People can't even afford to live. Then an organization is going to have people that don't feel valued. So that's like, I don't think talked enough about. We can focus on we can focus on recognition. We can focus on, tell them that they are valued, recognize them in front of peers, help them build the company, value them, include them in the dialogue. All of those things are important, but they can't compensate in an like in a humane way, if we're taking advantage of the loyalty, the admiration, the belief in what the company could be. Like, for example, this manifests very naturally where everyone's sacrificing, but those at the top, they think they are, they say they are, or they say they are, and they're not nearly as much as it appears as they make it out to be. Everyone else is sacrificing to their benefit. That's going to eventually catch up to that, to that, to everyone. It's going to catch on. The people are going to catch on, and the ownership, it's going to catch up with people that were once loyal to them, trusted them, and respected them, and cared for them, now resent them and want to destroy them. So, how to ensure employees feel valued? First, I'd say we need to be valuable employers. We need to be valuable employers. And I would listen to culture topic number 6, how to keep employees for the long run, on the Culture Runners podcast, and go to especially culture topic number 5, which is how do you attract top talent, to understand how, as an employer, to develop your value so that it's not just a place that people actually could speak freely, which is a part of people feeling, developing meaning for their lives. Because as employees work for companies and with organizations, they're going to have, even if it's not explicit, their own their own aims in life. They're going to have their own, as Peterson would say, what should be and what is, where they are and where they want to be. And the better that is in alignment with the organization's what is and where it wants to be, the more synergy there is between employees and employer, or employees and organization, employees and their, let's say it's just, and a subordinate to a boss, the less hierarchical it'll feel, and the more communicative, community oriented, team oriented, productive, and performative in a positive, profitable way it'll be. So, how to ensure employees feel valued. It I wanted to start with the compensation, because if we're not compensating our employees well, why? Is it because we can't? Is it because we don't want to? Is it because we can, but we don't think we can? Is it because, yeah, we can't and we know we can't? Well, how honest are we being about that? Is it because we can, but we don't want to? Well, why not? Is there a greater plan? Is it because we can, but we don't think we can? Is that a blind spot? Or why? Whatever the answer, those are just a few that you would think that you can. The clearer on why, and the more clear that is articulated to the people, that's actually going to, a lot of it's backwards. You have fear around transparency and vulnerability, but transparency necessitates vulnerability, which is a precondition to leadership, to trust building, to respect, to and that will lead to honesty from the people, which will lead to meaning, because the more honest we are in conflicts, because conflicts are an inevitability in business, as we are in business to solve problems. We're solving problem for customers. And as we solve problem for customers, there are problems that internally we have to solve together as a team to solve those problems for customers. So communicating, interacting honestly and openly, and in a way that makes everyone better, actually helps create value. It's a living out of the values, and we're able to be valuable, right? Valuable, as Mr. Calhoun would say on our pod. Listen to episode 544. What is an advisor and what is a board on the Culture Runners podcast with Mr. Mike Calhoun? He talks about being able to be valuable, or valuable, have a seat at the table, the board, telling the truth, feeling safe to do so, us being able to accept that from our people. And that is a art and a science. It's a progression. It's a maturation. It's a maturity thing. It's something that I am working on painfully, as Eddie Perez and the EPM folks would say, struggling unwell often, too often, working on being a better truth taker, truth holder, truth integrator, listener, person. So, how to ensure employees feel valued? Yeah, we can tell them. We also tell them through our actions. Are we including them in things? Do we meet? How often do we meet? How do we meet? Team meetings are one of those things that if they're not exciting and energizing, something's going on. There's something at odds. And I spent a lot of my time observing team gatherings and figuring out what's at the root of this. Is it structurally, like how the agenda is laid out? Is it a leadership blind spot? Is it, whether that's who's in the room, how many, who should be, how can it be facilitated at a higher order? What topics are being discussed? What aren't that should be? What are that shouldn't be? And getting your teeth in the meeting and really figuring out, how can this be more productive? Is it, so oftentimes in gatherings of that type with meetings in the beginning of a company, it's a lot of vision, it's a lot of explanation. It's a lot of euphoria. It's a lot of energy, a lot of things that have to be articulated from the founder that are implicit, nuanced, intuitive, that have to be articulated oratorically, spoken to with the people so that they can gravitate and execute on that vision. As it starts to manifest and actually succeed and become, the person that was once the orator has to become the inquirer and the orator and know how to switch gears. And that is a learning process that I have dedicated my life to help founders mature into CEOs. That is a learning process that happens organically. Um, it can be sped up with external helpers like myself and others that you may have heard on the show, the Culture Matters podcast. And some don't ever learn it, actually. And that can increase the likelihood of them being acquired at the lowest price or valuation or, take home as possible. Or it can work out well for them. I see a lot less and less and less of that. They never figure it out, or they never figure it out. And there are some other uh, innate gifts that they have or skills they develop that still lead them to success, or a higher order of success than most, but maybe not to the potential, to their absolute potential. So how to ensure employees feel valued? Number one, are we valuable? Is our organization valuable? Is it actually making strides? Is it growing? Not just growing for growth's sake, but how well is it executing on its strategic plan based on its vision? And that's going to have a relationship with how engaged the ownership and leadership are, which if you listen to culture topics 1 through 6, the last 6 episodes, you're going to have a pretty clear understanding of what it takes to be valuable. So that's okay. Check. Compensation plays a role because I am of the belief that an engaged, vision oriented, much, yeah, engaged, vision oriented, self aware. You could still be selfish. It's in your best interest to pay people well and get them incentivized to stay if they're really good, because you're playing a long game. You may not make any money for 10 years as a business owner, but year 11, you make more than you would have made if you paid yourself too much for year 1 through 10. You make more in year 11 than you would have made as an employee for 50 years or 100 years with another company. That's what it's like to be an owner, because you're playing the long game with equity and profit as something becomes something huge. A lot of people can't play that game. They don't have the temperament for it. They don't have the vision for it. They don't have the discipline, like the values for it. They don't, or like they haven't thought of these things ever. But, or, if they haven't thought of them, they had the opportunity to think of them like you are listening to this podcast, or it's not innate and born into them that they can't do it, or the structure of their partnerships aren't set up in a way where everyone's on the same page to actually do that. And that's creates a whole host of other issues like buyouts and dilutions and all these things, coup d'etats, et cetera, et cetera. So how to ensure employees feel valued is for the company to actually be valuable, which goes back to the ownership is actually valuable. And that means they're living their values. They're not just speaking their values, but they're living the values. And it's a valuable organization. Many organizations are not valuable. Now, can that change? I think they can't. That can't. Of course, I think that can't, because that's why we're in business to help organizations become more valuable. Culture matters. Values matter. Value matters. How do we create values? How do we, let's say, articulate values more than create? Because they're already happening. What are they bad? Are they deconstructive values? Or are they constructive values? And how many? We need both. Believe it or not, they play off each other. If you don't understand what that means, I recommend Peterson's lecture series on Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. There's that interplay between vice and virtue, and it's an inevitability. They feed off of each other. And so, first, for employees to feel valued, we've got to have a valuable organization. We have a valuable organization. We have to be valuable. To be valuable, we have to be of value or able to act out values. And how much values are we acting out? How much anti values? What the pros and cons of our individuality. More pros than cons, ideally. More sacrifice, more work, more. It's really a trade-off between our life and the business at a great degree when the founder of a company. It really does become a part of our identity it is our identity until it isn't, in a sense. And it's that's a whole nother show that we'll talk about in coming episodes. So recognize them in front of their peers. Like a great anti-value of that is to destroy people in front of their peers, in the sense that there's certain conversations that makes the most sense to have one-on-one versus in a group. And we might have a proclivity to have a conversation, a critical conversation in a group that's best to be one-on-one. Why would we want to do that? Because maybe below our awareness, we're a coward. We're acting cowardly. We're afraid to have that conversation to that subordinate in front of just the mirror alone, one-on-one. So we have it in front of a group, and it slowly just destroys it versus having it one-on-one. On another heightened, level, having one-on-one can create shame in itself. It's really true, and we need to be able to. Now, I really struggle with this. If it's one-on-one, I've got to. If I'm going to lay down truth, I've really got to be able to accept truth back. You're working with somebody that you want to help, and you're telling them what you think. It might really hurt their feelings. They're gonna hit you right back, and I got to be ready to accept what they're hitting me back with. I am terrible at that. Like as a from a temperamental standpoint and a uh, environmental standpoint, right? That's a very much a it's I have to, that is a weak spot that I've had to grow over time, and the how much better I get at that is incremental of 0.1% or a tenth of a percent of a percent. And the show helps me with this by interviewing, preparing, disciplining myself to prepare, doing the best to suspend judgments in interviews. That has helped me with that, to not react. And I'm better or worse depending on the context, like who and what's the dynamic of the relationship. And that is something I'm aware of. And I don't think I'm alone in that. It's part of human nature, but being willing to accept it and speak it out loud and even share it with you, I believe that's going to help me be better, be more responsible, or able to respond to conflict as I'm sharing the truth, being honest with myself, sharing it with the crowd, having that external accountability from you, whoever's listening to this, etc., etc. So help them build the company. Oh, this is one thing. I kind of want to end with this. How to ensure employees feel valued is actually for them to bring value. And if, uh, to get the most out of someone, like even just employee, it's like, okay, just because I'm employed, that doesn't mean that's my identity. It's like, God, I really don't think it's helpful that our culture today puts this like you should be an entrepreneur, you shouldn't be an employee. That's at least the things that I'm sucked into. That could be a bias of mine, but like the narrative is like an entrepreneur. There's so much. It's no, it's not the end all be. It's not. That's not everyone. You know, someone that's employed has so many. There's so much. There's so much value just and pride that could be placed in someone that is able to not only get a job but hold a job and be valuable to other people, their family, their community, by being employed. I hope that narrative it matures over time in our culture, or at least if we're in a cycle of it not being a center of pride. Or remember, this is my bias, so I could just be like in a funnel of like thinking that everyone cares about entrepreneurship. But for those that are in that paradigm where they think the entrepreneur is everything, the employee isn't. When an entrepreneur feels that way, oftentimes it's in the founding cycle, like the psychology to found a business creates that vacuum that I'm alluding to in my own state. If we're in that vacuum, the irony of like desiring hire employees to make one more successful and then simultaneously not respecting them, which is a paradox, because if you did, you wouldn't have the delusion to start a company, because you'd just be prideful of being an employee yourself and have their identity wrapped up as, yeah, I'm employed, I'm a good citizen, I pay my taxes, I can still earn great, I invest for the future, I tithe, I take care of my family, I enjoy my work. The person that starts a company may not necessarily feel any of those things. They may be angry and destructive around those ideas, and that's not their identity. And they use that energy to start the damn business. But at some point, when you have all these employees working for you, if you're going to get the most out of their labor and their brain, respecting them, appreciating their identity, valuing them, man, if I hire somebody for 100,000 a year, I want to get 1 million a year or 2 million or 3 million a year in value from it. I know that's just an example, like an extreme example. Depending on every business is different, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, if you're not getting a return on their labor and intellectual property to then, and this is where the responsibility comes in. I could see where some would be like, oh, that's, it's theft. It's like Das Kapital. Well, what are we doing with it? Are we making the world better? Or are we, just kind of engrossing and fattening ourselves? So I could see where that conspiracy comes from. Um, anyway, I have to go. This was a lot of fun. Follow me on Jay Doran _ the Culture Man on Instagram to hear these culture topics. This is how to ensure employees feel value. There's so much more I want to say to this, but I don't want to spend any more time on this. You have a great day, and I love you. And please leave us a review on the Culture Matters podcast. I can't believe I just said I love you. I don't even know who you are.